When the world feels heavy, whether it's what's happening around us or something deeply personal, one of the first things to fall apart is sleep. Not because you're doing something wrong, not because you don't care enough about rest, but because your nervous system is responding to stress, uncertainty, and threat exactly the way it is designed to. And yet, when sleep starts slipping, everything else gets harder. Your emotions feel bigger, your focus drops, your capacity shrinks. So that's why this episode is the first in a five-part series I'm calling When the World Feels Like Too Much. This series isn't about pushing through hard times or pretending things are fine. It's about how to take care of yourself practically and compassionately when life feels overwhelming, unstable, or unsafe. Across these five episodes, we'll talk about how to protect sleep during hard times, how to move your body when everything feels like too much, what your nervous system actually needs right now, the missing layer of care you might be skipping, and how to take action without burning yourself out. Each episode stands on its own, but together they form a kind of steadying path, not towards perfection, but towards support. Today, we're starting with sleep because sleep isn't a luxury in hard times. It's a form of protection. In this episode, I want to help you understand why sleep gets disrupted when stress is high, and more importantly, how to work with your nervous system to protect rest in ways that are realistic, flexible, and kind. This isn't about fixing your sleep or creating the perfect routine. It's about giving your system enough rest to get through what you're living in without losing yourself along the way. Let's start there. Be sure to listen. Welcome to the Self Loved ADHD Woman's Way podcast. I'm your host, Jen Barnes. If you're an ADHD woman entrepreneur, ADHD adjacent, or ADHD ish, you've come to the right place. We'll dive deep into the unique challenges you face, from the inner turmoil to the outer obstacles. We'll blend neuroscience, IFS, and somatic healing and explore practical strategies to help you navigate the world of entrepreneurship with ADHD with greater ease and effectiveness. I'm glad you're here. Hey, it's Jen. I'm so glad you're here. I'm really excited for this five-part series on what to do as the world falls apart around us so that we can not just survive it, but live as much as possible. And the reason I chose to focus on this is twofold. Number one, this is what everyone's coming in with. Granted, my office is in Minneapolis, just a couple miles from where Renee Good was killed. So there's that. But also, it's just everyone's talking about it, even people I work with that are in different states who I'm licensed in those states too, but they're talking about it and struggling with it. And so it feels really timely for those of us who are at least are in the United States, especially Minnesota, but maybe even more broadly throughout the world, because as you watch what's happening here, it does have worldwide implications potentially, depending on how this all gets resolved. So it felt really important to talk about it. And then number two, quite honestly, I don't have much else on my mind to share right now because my focus is on helping people heal this right now. And most of my clients have ADHD. So the ways I'm helping them are all very much to do with how to navigate this when we have ADHD. And primarily because most ADHD women tend to be highly sensitive. Most neurodivergent women tend to be highly sensitive. So whether that's autism or OCD or PTSD, whatever, we tend to be highly sensitive. And so we tend to have a strong sense of social justice, so that injustice impacts us very deeply. So I don't want to talk about what's going on. That's defeats the purpose of what this is about, but rather to talk about over this five-part series of how we navigate these times. And this first episode, we're going to talk about sleep, like I said in the intro. And I wanted to talk about sleep first because I always will remember there was a psychiatric nurse practitioner I worked with named Mallory Moss when I was in Colorado Springs doing community mental health. And she always said, when she would be working with a client on medication, the first thing I address is sleep. Because if they're not sleeping, nothing else we do is really going to help all that much. And so here we are, focusing on sleep first because I can share all these other pieces, but if you're not sleeping, it's just going to be too hard. When we don't sleep, there's studies that show that when we get an average of 5 to 6 hours of sleep, I don't know how many days that is. It could be one night, I'm not sure. But there's studies that show that we are as impaired as a drunk driver. It's just the danger is we don't realize we are. So we keep functioning, driving our cars, whatever. But yet we are truly impaired when we sleep. And you probably know this. You're probably more irritable when you haven't slept, grouchy. You feel like you have less energy, less in the tank to be able to do things. And it's not like this is a big shock to you, and it's not sustainable. We can't keep being in this place of deep exhaustion where we're like that. And I'm not listen, if you're a parent to a newborn child, you're gonna have some sleep deprivation. It's just gonna happen. And it's very important that you are getting as much sleep and rest as you can because you need to be rested, to be regulated, to help your baby, to be able to work with what's coming up. When they cry, not being upset because you're so tired. And I'm not here to judge if you're upset when they cry because you're so tired. Like, I get that. I would be too. I've not been there. I'm not here to judge. But more like sleep is something that can support that. It just can be challenging to figure out, like, how are you going to find that? But that's not what we're here to talk about today in terms of postnatal situations. But talking about how sleep can negatively impact us. And I want to say too, if you have ADHD, the impact that lack of sleep has on our brains, because it makes it harder to focus. We're more distractible when we haven't slept. We're more irritable and sensitive. It's harder to feel motivated to do things. We have a hard time directing and sustaining our attention. Well, doesn't that sound a lot like ADHD? Yeah, it does. And basically, not sleeping exacerbates ADHD. Plus hormones. So if you're in perimenopause or have been through perimenopause or maybe even pregnancy, I know sometimes sleep can be different during pregnancy, or we even watch our adolescents as they go through puberty need to sleep so much more. And that's because hormones can make us exhausted, but they can also interrupt our sleep. So it's very important if you're experiencing sleep challenges due to something like perimenopause or pregnancy that you're working closely with your medical professionals on that. And I just want to say before we get into too much of how we're going to work on this today, if you have long-term insomnia, it's very important that you work with your medical providers on that. They may recommend a sleep study if they haven't already to diagnose any kind of problems that may be getting in the way. So today's episode may help you, but it's not about that regular insomnia, but rather the importance of sleep during this time. And first, basic hygiene, basic sleep hygiene to help us to sleep. But also then, for those of you who have that like tightened up, you got a nice sleep hygiene situation going on. I also want to talk about some additional strategies and tools that I recommend with my clients and quite frankly, that I use myself that I find to be very effective. So let's get into it. And as we're getting into basic sleep hygiene, and it's important, like you hear me say, oh, it's so important you sleep or else all this stuff, that can create anxiety. And when we have anxiety about sleeping, sleep will elude us. It's kind of like when you're trying something really, really hard and you just can't get there. It's like you have to relax to allow it to happen. And so we're not talking about sleep being perfect here. We're talking about inviting sleep in. And so this is one of the things that I talk about when I talk about sleep hygiene is rule number one, if there's rules, don't try to go to sleep. Invite your body to rest. Invite yourself to lie down and rest, trusting that sleep will come, but that either way you're resting your body. Sometimes that can be enough. But let's back up a little bit and talk about some of the common sleep hygiene you hear about and why it's so important. So number one, going to bed at the same time every night and waking up at the same time every morning. That is really, really important because then your brain is like, oh, it's time to sleep. Oh, it's time to wake. It can also help to wake up with the sun because if you're getting up after the sun has been up for a long time, that can kind of mess with your circadian rhythm. And I get it can be hard, which I want to talk about here too. With ADHD, it can be hard for us to go to bed at a decent time. And there's a couple reasons that can happen. Number one, we can have a delayed circadian rhythm. So we might not truly feel tired when other people feel tired. But secondly, what I notice in myself and my clients is when we are finally off duty of whatever you have in your life, our brains are free. We're like, this is my free time. And so we want to extend that as long as possible. And then because we have time blindness or we follow nonlinear time, we lose track of time and don't realize that now it's 11:30 and we needed to go to bed an hour and a half ago. So it can be tricky with ADHD. That's why I actually set alarms. I set an alarm for 8:45 that tells me 8:45 p.m. that says, okay, start winding down. And that's when I need to be off screens, doing things like reading and other calm tasks, sitting and just petting my cats, whatever. And then I have another alarm goes off at 9:45. That's time to go brush my teeth, wash my face, and head to bed. And do I do that perfectly? No. Do I sometimes ignore the alarms? I mean, it's happened. And those are reminders to be like, okay, yes, this is important. And it's particularly important if I haven't been sleeping well. I'll follow those even more stringently than maybe if I've been okay. So, getting to bed at a quote unquote reasonable time for you, depending on what your work schedule is important for sleep hygiene and trying to have some consistency with that, but especially consistency with your wake time. Back when I was a case manager while I was in graduate school for social work, I remember there was a psychiatrist I worked with who she would actually talk about the importance of getting up at the same time every day. And I worked with kids back then, and so did she. And she would always say, like, okay, you've got to wake your child up at the same time every day, because then they will learn to be tired earlier at night. So the same is true for us. If we wake up at the same time, no matter what, we will then get more tired when it is that we want to go to sleep or when it's time to go to sleep. Those might be different. So that is really important for us. Number two, not doing stressful things within the hour before bed. So this is not the time to watch videos on YouTube of upsetting things. This is not the time to even necessarily write your Congress people. If you're in the States, I say Congress people, but maybe you have other representatives you're writing elsewhere. This is not the time to have a big discussion with your partner or be involved in any kind of argument. And if you do, we can talk about how to regulate afterwards. That might come more in the nervous system regulation piece, but we can talk about that a little bit because having conflict right before bed is not really inviting rest. You're stirring up your nervous system so that you're going into fight or flight, and your nervous system is like, no, ma'am, we are in protection mode right now. That is all we care about is survival. Sleep is not safe when there's a threat. So trying to avoid big conversations that might involve conflict at that time of night, watching scary shows, listening to murder podcasts, that's what I call them. I've got clients who love crime channels on podcasts, which fine, but not an hour before bed, because we want what goes in our brains an hour before bed to be inviting in rest, to be truly rejuvenating. And you might be like, that sounds nice, Jen. I would love to have a whole hour to do that. I've got 3 kids and I work full time. Okay, great. I get it. Can you try and do 30 minutes? Trying to get some downtime before you're going to bed, and at least trying not to have too much conflict right before bed. I get it. If you've got a child who resists bed and they're screaming and you go to bed not long after them, you're going to probably have some of that nervous system response because your body doesn't feel safe. And so then for you, whether you're a parent or someone else who's had conflict, it's important that you're regulating your nervous system. And maybe I'll just talk about that right now real quick before we go into it. So I'll talk more about this on the day that we talk about, the week that we talk about nervous system regulation. But real quick, do something to shake the fight or flight response off. So you can do the calmness mudra, lift your hands up to like goalposts and shake your hands back and forth. That can be really good. And then I like to do a little aura cleanse after that. So you can rub your hands together, getting that energy going, and you'll do it a little longer than I'm doing it for the sake of this podcast not being super long. And then you'll place your palms over your head, breathe in fully, and then swipe down your body, exhale completely, bump my face on my podcast mic, and then just shake it off. And then from there, you may feel more ready to do some kind of breathing technique. Another thing I really like, and I was going to get into this a little bit later in the podcast, but if conflict has come up, doing brain dump writing, maybe before you regulate your nervous system or after and then regulate again. So those are some things if that conflict does come up. All right, so back on to basic sleep hygiene. So we talked about going to bed and getting up at the same time every day, not doing stressful things right before bed. In fact, the recommendation is usually not to eat a big meal or exercise within 2 hours of bedtime. Uh, if that's the only time you can do it, if I would do a lighter workout if it's in the evening right before bed, something like yoga or a walk versus like a hardcore hit workout, just my professional opinion. And also try not to have a big meal before bed. In fact, Ayurveda, the sister science of yoga that I talked about in another episode recently, which is traditional medicine in India before modern medicine, that actually talks about our biggest meal should be lunch. And the reason is because we don't want our bodies trying to digest a big meal while we're sleeping. Instead, our body needs to be rejuvenating other things. So having your biggest meal at lunch is actually the best case scenario for that. And I don't know if you're like me and anyone else in perimenopause, having a big meal in the evening, like the heartburn situation, and it just doesn't digest as fast. And so like then you don't sleep as well. You really feel it in perimenopause. At least I have, and I've seen others too. So getting in that habit now, if you're not there yet, is a good idea. Also, if you are over a certain age, and what that age is, I have no idea. It depends on your bladder, if you've had pregnancies, whatever. Not having liquids an hour before bed. My doctor told me two. Now that I'm once I was in my 40s, she told me that a few years ago, in my late 40s. And I was like, I cannot have no liquid 2 hours before bed. And she's like, fine, 1 hour. And I find I have to really limit how much I drink that hour before bed. Otherwise, I end up waking up in the night and having to use the restroom. So it's important to be mindful if you're waking up in the middle of the night, having to go to the bathroom, or you're not sleeping well because you're having to go to the bathroom. Instead, work on like reducing your liquids as you're getting closer to your bedtime, having much more of your fluids during the day and in the early hours of the day or earlier hours of the day, so that you're not dehydrating yourself by cutting your liquids off an hour or two before bed, but that you're actually you'll still be hydrated, but you're prepping yourself for sleep. Of course, if your doctor tells you something else, please listen to them. I'm just sharing what I know given my experience as a therapist and clinical social worker, as well as listening to like sharing what my own doctors have said. So that's important to remember. I'm trying to think of other sleep hygiene things that are just not coming to me right now, but definitely trying to focus on creating a bedtime routine. So whether that's reading for an hour or even 30 minutes, or I love listening to Hertz music, Hertz, like the car rental company. It's pronounced Hertz because the guy's German. But at any rate, listening to Hertz meditation music, it has like different frequencies you can listen to. There's plenty for sleep, but there's also some for just relaxation or whatever else is going on. You can go into YouTube and just say Hertz music for a common cold. I was starting to get sick the other day and I listened to that. There's even one for constipation, but the comments on that one are hilarious because everyone's like, "Oh, sitting on the toilet, I guess you are too." So anyway, I digress. But there's Hertz music for everything, but you can think about what your day was like and then do like listen to a Hertz music meditation, even in the background of whatever else you're doing. If you're having to do dishes, that's a great way to start to wind down is have that music playing in the background and you can listen to it that way. Okay. So I've touched on the big sleep hygiene things. I know we say no screens an hour before bed. That's an important one, especially not 30 minutes before bed. I was going to fact check this next thing before I did my podcast, totally forgot. So I'm just going to share and you can fact check it yourself. Sorry. I have a client who saw a doctor for sleep who specializes in sleep, and she's going to have a sleep study. And the doctor told her it's less about the blue light of the screens, it's more about what you're doing on your screen before bed. I don't know if that's true because I thought there were lots of studies saying the blue light is interrupting sleep. So take that with a grain of salt. But again, really being intentional about what you're doing that hour before you go to sleep. And maybe just for now, cutting off the screens at least 30 to 60 minutes before bed in case it is that blue light that is not helping you sleep. Okay. So those were some basic sleep hygiene things. Now I want to get into kind of next level strategies for sleep, if you will. One of the biggest things that I talk about for sleeping well is that sleep starts the morning before you go to bed. So, in other words, waking up at a reasonable time in the morning, preferably close to when the sun comes up. It doesn't have to be at the exact moment. And I understand if you're a shift worker, this is not going to be possible for you. These are just best case scenarios I'm sharing. We're not going for perfection here. We're just trying to optimize the chances that we have a good night of rest. Trying to get up at the same time every day, like we talked about with sleep hygiene, but that will set up the rest of your day so that you're not rushing through the day trying to get everything done. Doing something to regulate your nervous system in the morning. Also, getting in some movement. We're going to talk about movement in another episode of this series, but getting some movement in your body will actually make your body more ready for rest when it is time to go to bed at night. So getting in movement. And what do I mean by movement? You could go for a walk. You could go for 3 10-minute walks in a day. Or if you're not able to move that much, you could do some chair yoga. Really getting in any kind of movement. You could dance in your chair. Whatever it is you got going on, put some music on and have a little dance jam in your kitchen. Getting movement in is using up the energy that comes in from food so that you're just not at bedtime and you're wide awake and you got all this energy, excess energy. Exercise actually helps. And with ADHD, I gotta say, I know there's not like silver bullets or anything, but the thing that has helped me more than anything with ADHD is, well, sleep and movement. So getting in movement every day is going to also help you sleep. Also, finding a time in your day for brain dump writing. Not right before bed usually, because then all that stuff is stirred up. But maybe the morning before you're going to go to bed that night, or maybe sometime during the day to just dump out all the things from your day. So not in that hour before bed, but maybe leading up to it. And you can write for as long as you want. You can write for a page, you can write for 3, it doesn't matter. But getting all that stuff out of your head so that you're not reeling in anxiety or thoughts about whatever it is that happened in your day or week or year or life. So letting yourself brain dump right. I also highly recommend doing, if you've been having a hard time sleeping, legs up the wall yoga pose. So legs up the wall yoga pose, I think I'm going to take a pen and my hand to demonstrate, but the pen is the wall and you're going to put I don't think I have that flexibility in my hand anymore. Yeah, I do. Okay. So you're going to put your bottom up against the wall, your butt up against the wall, and you're going to swing your legs up the wall. And you can have them bent or straight, and you can scoot your bottom as far away from the wall as feels comfortable for you. And then you're going to lie on your back with your legs literally up the wall. So you'll look like you're in an L shape. And you can stay there for a few minutes if it's your first time, maybe 5 if you've done it a time or 2, maybe longer after you get used to it. But the key to legs up the wall yoga pose, before I share more about it, is that you get up slowly because you've just taken all the blood and moved it from your feet. So if you get up quickly from legs up the wall pose, you will faint and you might hit your head. And that is a whole other issue that we don't even want you to have. So when you get up from legs up the wall pose, you're going to bend your knees so that your feet come down the wall, then roll over onto your side, rest on your side for a little bit, let things kind of adjust, maybe a few breaths, then sit up, but with your legs still on the ground, but your torso is vertical to the ground, perpendicular to the ground, and let yourself take a few breaths there. And then if you don't feel lightheaded, you can get up and go into bed. But doing that nice and slowly with the breath will help make it safe. This is a pose for insomnia. When I first did my yoga teacher training in 2009, we learned about using this for insomnia. It's also just a great one for stress reduction in general, but it can really help. I will sometimes use this before I go to bed, but I'll often use it if I wake up in the middle of the night, especially if I had a bad dream or I'm having a hard time going back to sleep. I'll just get on the ground and stick my legs up the wall. And when I don't, I usually regret it and end up eventually doing it anyway. So rather than lying in bed and being frustrated, doing legs up the wall pose can really help. I do want to say if you have glaucoma, it is technically considered an inversion. So you might want to check with your doctor if this is okay. Inversions in yoga put pressure on the eyes. And for people who have glaucoma, you already have pressure issues with your eyes. So make sure you're checking with your doctor if you have glaucoma before you do legs up the wall yoga pose. Okay, so that's one I like. We talked about brain dump writing. What I also like to do is it's actually a self-hypnosis sleep meditation on Insight Timer. And so this one is by Memory Lane. It might still be Memory Lane Hypnosis, or it might just say Memory Lane. It's full body relaxation. I swear by that one. It's awesome. Love it. You can try it out. Also, Insight Timer has tens of thousands of free meditations, and there are plenty for sleep. So I highly recommend that app. It's free for sleep meditations. I like that over YouTube because YouTube has ads and you don't want things subconsciously going in while you're sleeping. So there's that. Unless you have YouTube Premium, then maybe there's something there that works well for you. But I prefer using Insight Timer because that's what the purpose of it is. And then last but not least, what I've been doing lately as I'm about to fall asleep, or not as I fall asleep, but once I get in bed, I've turned on my sleep meditation. The first thing I do is as I'm lying there, I think of 3 things that I'm grateful for from that day. And if you're like, wow, nothing from this day, well, guess what? You're probably grateful for indoor flushable toilets. Because if you're in Minnesota right now, it's cold and no one wants to pee outside. So, like, there's something you're grateful for. How about clean water? So if it's one of those days you're having a hard time, you can always go to some of those regular things in your life that you might not have if you were born at a different time or somewhere or a different place. Then invite in the light. Now, whatever light you believe in. So whether that's the light of spirit or source or the goddess or God or Allah or whatever, but breathe the light in through the crown of your head, move it through your body, through your feet, and then back up and out over your whole body. And you can keep breathing in that light and then listening to your sleep meditation as a way to tell your body that it is safe to rest, that you are being held. And if you're like, I don't believe in any kind of higher power, that's okay. Just breathe in light, maybe the light of nature, the beauty of nature. So that's okay. It doesn't have to be this big God thing if that's not your jam. Okay. Last but not least, I want to talk about what happens after you wake up and you don't have a good night's sleep. Or maybe you didn't sleep all night. Or maybe in the middle of the night you realize you're not going to sleep. Well, sleep doctors tell us not to lie in bed when you can't sleep. And so that is the current recommendation as I know it. But I find some of the tools I just gave you really help. But if that's you, what I will do is I will practice yoga nidra. So yoga nidra is a practice of deep relaxation and deep rest. It stimulates our alpha waves, which are not the delta and beta waves of sleep, or not beta, I'm sorry, the delta and theta waves of sleep, but the alpha waves are deep relaxation. And so you can look for yoga nidra practice on Insight Timer. There's probably plenty. You might listen to it before you listen to it while you're in that deep state of rest, just to make sure you vibe with everything they say. I'm sure if it's on Insight Timer, it's probably safe, but especially if you're on YouTube, I would check out what they're saying in those. But it is a practice of deep rest. So you lie on your back, getting comfortable. You might have props or a pillow or whatever, and it will guide you through different practices. And usually the first one is setting an intention. The next one is usually sending the light of your awareness to different parts of your body. There's a piece of it that might be focusing on your breath. And then there's another part that might have you imagine feelings, different sensations, and the opposites of them to like, it's a way to train your brain that you have the capacity to control your experience. And then a lot of them will also have a I'm gonna say a word and you think of it. So, for example, mine often says Egyptian pyramid. So, bring to mind an Egyptian pyramid, and then stars at night. And so you imagine that. And then a lot of times it'll end with the intention that you had. So that can be kind of that is what yoga nidra is. There's a much more I can't think of the word I want. Less yogic approach to it called I rest. That's much more not spiritual. Oh my gosh, the word's totally gone. Anyway, that if you want more of a like the layers of spirituality stripped from it, you can look for I rest. That one you might have to purchase like practices in it, but that's a lovely practice. We used to use it with the service members when I worked at Fort Carson. Although I did my flowery yoga nidra, and I rest is kind of some of that stripped away. But either practices are lovely. So they say yoga nidra has, like I've heard in my yoga teacher training, that yoga nidra practice is equivalent to a night of sleep. Now, that does not mean that you just don't sleep and I'll just do yoga nidra. It means use this to help you feel more rested if you struggled to sleep the night before. And yoga nidra is meant to be done awake, but if you fall asleep, your subconscious will still take in the messages. And so it'll still be deeply relaxing for you. So I would just make sure you set a timer when you start it because you might fall asleep. All right, y'all. I hope this episode was helpful for you in some way. Next up, now I can't remember what we talk about next. I think next up we're going to talk about movement and different options for movement and why that's important. And not just for ADHD, but for these times. And that one will probably be a little shorter. And then I believe the third part of this series is going to be nervous system. And then I've got 2 more parts after that. So stay tuned. If you're not following this podcast or subscribed yet, make sure you subscribe or follow to make sure you catch all of how we navigate these hard times in our life. Thank you so much for being here. Take good care.